Joey, thanks for joining the program.
Hey, thanks for having me, Aaron.
Yeah, well, tell us a little bit about it. What was its genesis, and kind of how did this thing get started?
Yeah, absolutely. Our sports editor, Tommy Dees, who did a fantastic job with this was his baby, his brainchild. He actually approached me in the summer of 2016. Hey, I want to do a project on should your kids play football. Some things came about that we weren't able to pursue it last year. So we dove into it this year, and it was way more comprehensive than I ever could have imagined. It being when he first came to us with the idea, and I'm so thankful that we did wait a year because that allowed us, as you know, working with her at Alabama games, allowed us to get intern Molly Walsh, who actually did a full-length documentary for us and did a wonderful job bringing that video component to this project for us.
All in all, when you really dug into it full time, and I know it wasn't full time, you had your duties on top of this, but how long do you say this took to put together?
We started at least collecting interviews at the end of July.
End of July, and what did you find? I mean, what was at the end of the day? Is there a conclusive result, or is it just kind of still open ended?
From my end, I did more of the let's look at these personal stories and how people were impacted by either playing or not playing. Tommy and Molly got into a little bit more of the data gathering. But for me, from what I did, there were so many people that had those benefits. You're talking to high school football coaches and players, and you learned a lot of interesting reasons why they felt it was positive. But then I guess it was eye-opening for me to talk to a lot of people who played that suffer from long-term injuries that go far beyond the concerns of CTE, whether it be spinal or just, knee aches and that sort of thing. But overwhelmingly, a lot of those people that have suffered from those injuries said that they would play again. But there was also a good number that said, no, I wouldn't play again, and I wouldn't let my child play either.
Joey, the science on this is relatively new. What does it say, and have they conclusively resulted that football is resulting in CTE, or is that science still undetermined?
I feel like so many of the studies are showing that there is an impact. There hasn't been as much research done with like a younger age group. Let's say you only played through the high school level versus the professional level. I think that this research is still so early in its stages that it's hard to determine, but at the same time, it's also hard to deny the fact that this can cause issues. A lot of people are talking about how it's more those subconcussive hits, just being hit over and over again, that it is necessarily, you got your bell rung in one game.
This is a football crazed state, and from what you found from youth level through the high school ranks, how have participation numbers? What are those over the last decade? Is there a sign that that these worries are starting to cause parents to withhold their children from the game?
If you look at some of the stories we did, Tommy in particular, flag football numbers are at an all-time high. West Alabama Youth Athletic Association, some of those numbers have dropped, but then one of the stories I did focused exclusively on Gordo, where participation is at an all-time high as it has been in the past decade, and they actually have 76 kids out playing youth football right now. I think compared to other states, participation in Alabama has dropped some at the high school level, but nowhere near where it has from a nationwide perspective. And a lot of that is because this is such a big football state. And, we've got Alabama in our backyard, so our area in particular, we are very football heavy here.
Talking to Joey Chandler, covers high school sports for the Tuscaloosa News, and they put out an outstanding special project today entitled "Should Your Kid Play Football?" From a medical perspective. What are doctors saying in terms of when a kid should start playing tackle football? I've read stories and listened to interviews from even NFL players who said they wouldn't allow their kid to play football before at least high school. Have the doctors weighed in on that with the brain still forming as they're growing up, that they should be withheld from the sport? Is there an age where they feel like if you're going to let your kid play, you shouldn't let them play before this kind of threshold?
From a medical standpoint, Tommy is a better person to ask about that. I know some of the studies I have read said you want to wait until their brains are formed a little more. I know for me, just talking to coaches and people in general, even, one of the people I spoke with was Hubbartville High School coach Lamar Harris, and he's been coaching for 41 years. He's obviously a big proponent of the game, but even he was quick to say, I would not want them playing tackle anywhere before the 7th grade.
And from the high school coaches that you talk to, what's their, obviously they're biased. They've made their career in some regard, some respect, tied to the game. What are they saying about it? Were they hesitant to participate in this study?
No, the coaches were great. And I think one thing about our study that kind of sets it out from a lot of others is, we weren't out to just focus on the concussion issue. We weren't out to just focus on injuries. This is a full comprehensive look at, if you look, the majority of the stories I did for this piece, they're about the benefits of playing. They're not just about the negatives. And these coaches definitely showed some examples of why there are benefits to playing, just like there are playing any sport. And so many of them focused on not necessarily things the kids have been benefiting from at this moment, putting on a helmet, but the lessons that it teaches them for later in life when things get tough and things get them down. And that was a pretty interesting perspective that these coaches even talk about, how some of them don't know where they would be right now if it weren't for the sport of football and the opportunities that sport gave them, and just about how it's such an important sport to teach discipline. You got to show up to work on time. If you don't show up to work, you're not going to pay your bills, and just how this is a sport that helps prepare them for that adult life to be successful. And they already know how to deal with losses. So if they're hit with something really big in that adult life, they're easily better to be able to rebound from whatever adversity is that they are facing.
Yeah, and I think, when you're tackling this issue at the high school level, it goes beyond, the health. When you're talking about, high school football on Friday nights is a large way that people keep in contact as a community. You mentioned Gordo. You go to a Gordo football game on Friday night, and the whole town's there. Same thing with several communities in our coverage area. And without that, I struggle to think about how high school relations past when you graduate would even be anymore, because so many people keep in contact with their former alma mater through Friday night high school football.
Yeah, I agree. Friday night football is such an institution. I mean, there's a reason why there are movies and books and TV shows out there titled Friday Night Lights. It's a part of American culture, especially in small towns, and I think it has so many positives, like you said, not just for the people that are playing, for former players, just for people from the town, town pride. You look at some of these schools when they make it to Super 7 or the playoffs, and they've got to drive 3 or 4 hours, and that whole town, they drive 3 or 4 hours with them just to support those players and have pride in who they are and where they come from.
Wrapping up here with Joey Chandler. You can follow her on Twitter at Joey_T News. What were the players' perspective? And I'm sure some people would argue that they don't have the proper perspective on life right now because they're still young. They think they're invincible. But did you talk to any high school players that had any concerns about what they may be doing to their future by playing football at such a young age?
I honestly didn't hear any say that they had concerns. And I think, like you said, they're playing right now. They're in it. I did talk to Gordo senior Colin Herring, where, he mentioned a lot about just how, he can't remember a time in his life where he wasn't at a football game in Gordo on a Friday night. And again, that just goes back to just how that's ingrained in them from a young age. And, for him and many others, it's been a positive in their life. And I think it's just something, I know from experience, when I was in high school and would get hurt and was playing when I shouldn't be playing, I didn't think about the repercussions of that. I don't think many kids do.
Joe, if people want to take a look at this multi-part, multimedia study, how can they view it?
Yeah, if you go to tuscaloosa.youtube.com, there should be a banner located near the top of the page where you can click. You can read all of the articles. You can check out Molly's documentary. Molly, Tommy, and I sat down and did a podcast discussing some of the steps it took to put this together. And I really encourage anyone who looks at it again to look at it from its whole perspective and realize, this wasn't something we did to say football is bad or you shouldn't play football. This was something we did just to show the impact football does have on society and what those risks are, because like it or not, those